In an interview with MILF porn aficionado and tonsil stone eater Ted Cruz, Fox News fraud Sean Hannity, who's also a brazen hypocrite, decided to ask Ted Cruz about his experience last week at a restaurant in DC where he was basically forced to leave due to a lot of protesters who were confronting him about his Kavanaugh vote. And during this interview, he made a recommendation to Ted Cruz about what they can do to shut down these protests, and it was just brazenly undemocratic. So let's hear what he has to say, and then I have a message to Sean Hannity when we come back.
And let me ask you this. I watched you, and I know your wife, Heidi, I watched you get run out of a restaurant. We've seen it happen to Secretary Nielsen, Pam Bondi, it's happened to Sarah Sanders, Mitch McConnell. It's happening like on a daily basis. I don't think you should leave the halls of the Senate open. And I'm saying that for the safety, the protection of people we elect. I fear for everyone's safety at this moment.
There are a lot of senators who are having that conversation. You know, Monday night, Heidi was up in D.C., and the two of us went out about 9 o'clock at night to do a date night, just the two of us. We don't get to do that very often. We showed up at a restaurant that we love. It's a delightful restaurant. Unfortunately, somehow the protesters were there waiting for us as we walked in. They surrounded us. They screamed at us. They basically shut down the restaurant, and they made it impossible to have dinner. And so Heidi and I got up to leave. They blocked her from getting out. When we left the restaurant, you know, this actually has not been reported, but we left the restaurant, we went out the door and around a back alley, and this mob of about 15 screaming leftist protesters chased Heidi and me down the alley, screaming and yelling at us. A waiter from the restaurant let us in the back door to the kitchen, and we took shelter in the kitchen with this screaming mob outside. Now, I'll tell you a happy ending to that. So about 10 minutes later, the police arrived and they removed the protesters. And I asked Heidi, I said, okay, well, what do you want to do now? Do you want to go somewhere else? What do you want to do? And she said, no, I like this restaurant. Let's go have date night. So we went back through the kitchen, sat down at the same table, and we had a delightful, romantic dinner, just the two of us.
So Sean Hannity says that since protesting Republican politicians at restaurants is becoming more common, while he fears for their safety, and as a result, quote, I don't think you should leave the halls of the Senate open. I fear for everyone's safety at this moment. So, in other words, Sean Hannity wants members of the Senate to be even more insulated from the public. It's already the case, mind you, that they don't show up to town halls. They refuse to return phone calls. They don't even answer emails. In fact, you'd be lucky to get an automated response from one of their staffers. And he wants to make sure that these elected officials who are supposed to be responsive to their constituents are even more insulated from the public. And the one place that protesters are still able to reach members of the Senate through the actual halls of the Senate, well, Sean Hannity wants to cut them off from that as well. So let's give Sean Hannity a little crash course in cause and effect. If it's the case that a lack of responsiveness to constituents is what initially catalyzed this phenomenon where they see you at restaurants and they protest you, then what do you think is going to happen, Sean, if you make it even more difficult for constituents to reach their elected officials? Do you honestly think that this is going to reduce the number of dinners being disrupted at restaurants? I mean, you can't honestly believe that. You're only going to make matters worse. The reason why so many dinners are being disrupted, why so many members of the Senate are being shouted at, is because they refuse to listen. So if you take away another means of them being able to protest and get the message across to members of the Senate, well, you're only going to make matters worse. But Sean Hannity doesn't think. He just wants to insulate people in power, and he claims that he's really concerned with, the safety of senators, and generally speaking, I think we all are. We don't want there to be violence. Certainly we believe in civil disobedience, but non-violent methods are absolutely important. But the reason why I don't think he believes in their safety is because when Alex Jones followed Bernie Sanders around an airport and harassed him, Sean Hannity said nothing about that. So if you're concerned with the safety of senators, I'd imagine that a raving lunatic like Alex Jones might pose the biggest risk to politician safety. But Sean Hannity didn't say anything about that. And what he's really concerned about here is grassroots activists actually being able to influence politicians. He doesn't like that showing up to the halls of the Senate actually is an effective way to get your voice heard. He hates that. He doesn't want politicians to be persuaded by grassroots activists because that'd be going against the policies that he wants to advocate for. So, Sean Hannity is nothing more than a fraud, and if truly reducing the number of dinner disruptions is his goal, then you need to expand the number of ways that protesters are able to reach politicians. If you reduce that, you're going to see a lot more dinner disruptions. So I just don't believe anything he says. I don't believe he's concerned with safety. It's just about punishing the left and punishing grassroots activists, because this is the definition of a propagandist. All he does is propaganda at the behest of the Republican Party. He's as much an arm of the Republican Party as the RNC. That's how big of a role Sean Hannity plays. He is pure propaganda. And in saying that, these protesters should also not be allowed to protest the halls of the Senate, and they shouldn't be allowed to protest politicians at restaurants. He needs to admit that he's just against democracy. He's against democracy. He doesn't think protesters should be allowed to exercise their First Amendment rights. They're being nonviolent. Has there been any incidents where a protester has attacked a member of the Senate? No, they're just shaming them. They're yelling at them, and they're trying to communicate what they want politically. So there's no security threat. There's no safety risk that they pose. He is just an elitist prick that wants to insulate people in power from the peasants. That's all this is about.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.